The Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce serves the interest of its members through numerous programs, advocates for a free and open market economy in Afghanistan, and endeavors to strengthen U.S.-Afghanistan economic relations. AACC's annual U.S.-Afghanistan Business Matchmaking Conference is the world's leading event for promotion of the private sector, business matchmaking, and investment in Afghanistan. AACC works to ensure that Afghanistan's economy and employment of the Afghan people remains a top priority for the U.S. and Afghan policymakers, and serves as a link between business and government to encourage progressive economic policies that will result in increased business, job creation, and investment between the U.S. and Afghanistan. We believe that peace and stability can only be achieved in Afghanistan through the success and growth of the private sector. It is the goal of AACC to promote the exchange of information and provide resources to its members through investment conferences, seminars, networking events, publications, and other avenues to stimulate U.S.-Afghanistan business and investment. The Afghan-American Chamber of Commerce, facilitating U.S.-Afghan business, investment, and trade ties.
So tomorrow at 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. at the Atlantic Council, which is right down the street at 15th and I want to say N or M, they are hosting Chairman Azizi of ATRA and his fellow board member Bashmila Karam for a discussion about ICT future investments in Afghanistan. And they'll have, I think, breakfast set up there as well. So if you go early, you can get breakfast and coffee and tea and then enjoy the event. We're going to post the event up on the screen so that you can see the RSVP. It's a short walk from here, and if you're coming from the Wharf Hotel, it'll be just a 5-minute taxi ride to get there, I think, maybe 10 on a Friday morning as a result. So please try to attend tomorrow if you can. If not, we're going to move on now for our schedule. So our first speaker this morning is from the World Bank. Ms. Tuta Kanatu Ku is coming to us. We're very grateful because the bank is still in the post-IMF World Bank meeting mode. And so we had hoped to have the Vice President for Afghanistan and Asia, and Annette Dixon, but she's now moved to the Human Capital Department of the bank. That decision was made a few months ago. And as a result now, we're waiting for her replacement. But we're very grateful that Tuta agreed to come this morning and talk to us about the World Bank programs that are affecting private sector enabling environment, talk a little bit about the investment side, and maybe give us a fuller brief out on the bank meetings and how Afghanistan is doing a little bit. And then we'll have some time afterwards to have a conversation with you, any questions you might have with regard to investments from the bank going into Afghanistan, obviously through the Afghan government and the administration of President Ghani. So Tuta, come on up, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay, you can hear me. Good morning, everybody. I actually don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I do have some notes that I just want to pull them. Okay. Well, thank you, Jeffrey, for inviting the World Bank, and I apologize on behalf of our Vice President. She moved on, and we don't have a Vice President for the South Asia region yet. But I'm actually very grateful to be here because I do work in Afghanistan. It's actually one of the countries that I feel very passionate about. So when I was asked to step in on behalf of Annette, our former Vice President, I was like, yes, sure. Very happy to share our experience. So what I want to do this morning, just walk you through what the World Bank strategy overall is in Afghanistan, like how we have been involved. And I'm going to touch briefly upon what the projects that are ongoing that we are working on, primarily focusing on some projects that actually are focusing on bringing in more private sector investment or facilitating it. And then I'll end by talking of what next, where we are going next. And especially having in mind the session that's going to follow, it's going to be mostly focusing on energy. So I'm going to actually try to talk more about the World Bank's role within the energy space. So World Bank has been very active in Afghanistan since 2002. To date, we have a commitment of like 3.8 billion that we have committed so far. And the way the World Bank works is that every 3 or 4 years, we develop this strategy together with the government, which usually covers like a period of 3 years, where we agree together with the government, what are we focusing on this cycle. So the current strategy that we are undergoing is covering the period between 2017 and 2020. And what is actually new on this strategy is that we have identified stimulating private investment, and one of the main areas among others that we normally do, which is like infrastructure, macro-fiscal environment, human development, anti-corruption, and governance issues, and many others, which are our traditional engagement. But what we also understood at the bank is like, okay, we are coming at a different stage, and we alone, just the public resources, cannot actually meet all the needs. So we have to start thinking more of engagement with the private sector. For example, just last month, we had a new operation, the financing operation that got approved by a board. It's a package worth of like some 700 million. And even that one is actually looking into some private sector investments, which is already we can see where we are going. So it is quite encouraging also for us, the team in the ground, to see that even from the management side, there is a lot of like a more like broad programmatic thinking in terms of how do we engage with the country. So what have we done so far? We actually have been doing a lot in a lot of sectors, and I want to start kind of just walk you through what kind of we think are the building blocks about creating that enabling environment for the private sector and even just a local private sector. So focusing on SMEs, starting with the small, medium enterprises. One involvement where we have been focusing a lot is access to finance. We understand that if you are a small, medium enterprise, in order for you to run your business and grow your business, you need to be able to access financing from your bank. If you cannot do that, and if you just have to wait until you save enough to make the next purchase or next investment, it's going to take forever for you to get where you really want to get or just grow the business. So that has been one of the areas where working together with the local commercial banks, the World Bank has been helping them to increase their lending capacity, but also build the technical expertise of what they need to do, how they need to assess the request for the loans. We have also put together, there is this Afghanistan guarantee facility actually that helps commercial banks to increase the lending capacity. So that's one area we were focusing. But then we have on the financing, if we just stay in the financing space, there is a central bank. So we want to make sure that central bank can actually monitor this commercial bank. So for example, looking at their supervisory role. So we have realized that they needed some capacity strengthening there. And we have been working with the central bank to increase that, and also to conduct the audit of some like 10 commercial banks. And through that audit, which would focus on how these commercial banks are meeting international standards, what our goal would be to come in, then once that audit is completed, we come in with some action plan to pretty much address any gaps or weaknesses that have been identified through this study. So that's on the financing side. What else we have done? Well, PPP, actually, public-private partnership, which is quite a new concept in Afghanistan, if you think. It's been kind of floating around in the last 2-3 years, where we started engaging with the government to build some sort of like a framework in the country about the public-private partnership. We were actually supported, we have a trust fund which is called the PPP, Public-Private Infrastructure Advisory Facility, that is hosted within the World Bank. So we were very happy and lucky to actually receive some support from them, which helped us to work together with the government, create this enabling environment. So the government is also now able to develop PPP projects, but implement them as well. So as a result, now there is a PPP central authority at the government, which sits with the Minister of Finance. But there is also a new PPP law that was just actually recently approved by the Parliament. So it is like another part of like environment that we are thinking. Then what else? Well, trade. Trade is one of the very important areas where we look like when we think about the investments. And what we have done in the trade space, we have so far really focused on the customs, improvement of the efficiency of the customs. And not just improvement of the efficiency, but also increasing their capacity, but also their ability to actually communicate with the custom and the border authority of the neighboring countries. So we have invested actually a lot of like modernization of their administration, like improvement in the technology and things like this. Then transport. I mean, if you cannot move the goods, I mean, it's very hard to develop, right? So one example, and I'm sure it's not the only, but one that maybe I can just highlight today here is the Trans-Hindu Kush Road, which I understand is a very mountainous road, and it was the movement of the goods and people was only limited during like a spring or fall season. So what we have done, we have actually tried to build like more like a roads that actually there is a continuous movement on these roads that people and goods can move throughout the year, that they are not limited just in a like a better seasons. ICT is actually another area that we have also focused, and Jeffrey just mentioned it, but we have already started looking into that. Actually, the recent package that was approved that I just mentioned, it does include this, the ICT component, where the idea is to actually develop the fiber optic regional network, and the bank will put money for part of it, but the idea is that actually we'll bring in a private sector to do the rest of the infrastructure. And the purpose clearly of this is to increase the access to the internet, but also reduce the cost, because we all are aware today the role that the internet plays in anything from doing business to just personal lives. So, and now just coming to the energy, so which is, I think, very like maybe interesting topic, and it's going to be something that we're going to talk in the next session. So our focus, actually we do a lot in energy space, and I have to say that's where also I come in. I do most work in the energy sector in Afghanistan. So what we have focused so far has been mostly on the access, to increase access to energy for both residential but also businesses. And we all understand the importance of the energy that it has, whether on just our lives or like running a business, especially when it comes to businesses, right? I mean, if you don't have a 24-hour reliable electricity, what does it say in terms of the cost, right? Well, we all know, I mean, it's that loud generator sitting next to your shop, right? Which unfortunately adds the cost as well. It's not just the noise pollution, but it's also the cost. So, and then the cost, of course, creates like pressure on the competitiveness. So it's really damaging a lot of businesses. So our goal has been focusing on just expanding the access, either through making sure there is some additional connection or improving increasing the capacity of the existing hydropower plants. One major project that we also have that is actually about trade of electricity is, I don't know if you're familiar with CASA 1000. It's a huge regional project, and CASA stands for Central Asia, South Asia. And it covers 4 countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. And the idea is that through building these interconnection transmissions line, you actually facilitate the electricity trade as well. And the idea is that there is some complementarity in terms of the available capacity within these countries. So the idea is then that you can actually exchange. But another aspect we have been focusing on the energy space is DABS, the utility company. So that we have been actually focusing more on their capacity. like a planning team, especially how they can plan for investments, and also because they are the central part of the energy sector, right? If you don't have the sustainable company who actually manages the sector, makes the right decision in terms of the investment and improvements of the services, then we can hardly think it's not just about adding capacity, it's not about just adding customers. You actually have to make sure the company can manage those. So we have started working with a team to actually improve the capacity. So this is just like a short summary of what we have been doing so far. But now, what next, right? I mean, where we are going from here. And I mean, a lot of these projects have actually, most of them focus on enabling environment, not necessarily directly working with the private sector. And I don't know if we have any private investors, so I'm sure like you've been thinking, well, but what's there about me? How can I directly benefit from you, World Bank? What can you do for me? Well, first, I'll tell you, we cannot lend to you. So that's something I have to disclose, because we only lend or give money to the government. But we do have something else that we can give to the private sector, and it's something new that we are doing in Afghanistan, where we are actually engaging more and more with private sector on the energy aspect. And we have started looking into the possibility to use our guarantee instrument where as we come in as the guarantor, and through the guarantee instrument we backstop certain government obligations that they have entered into with the private sector. And in this case, the private sector is typically the main beneficiary of the instrument. So that's what we do directly for the private sector. And the way it works is that, so we agree, we actually usually, it becomes more like a tripartite conversation between the World Bank, the government, and the private sector, especially when you are discussing the agreement and you're discussing what kind of government obligation you want them to undertake, what kind of obligation will be on the part of the private sector, and really how you're going to share this risk, and then who is best positioned to actually take certain risk. But at the same time, what we find very often is that private sector, especially the first comers, like if it's a kind of agreement that the government has not really done before, there is always that risk, but is government going to default? What if they don't stay behind their obligation? And then I put all this investment and then I'm going to lose all my investment. So that's where the World Bank comes in. So because we say we're there as a guarantor, well, we say if the government defaults on this obligation, then you will receive some compensation from the World Bank. We come in, and that's where our role comes in. So what we have been looking in Afghanistan in the energy sector? Well, I mean, we have 3 projects we are currently exploring how we can help. One, and I know Monty is here, so you're going to hear about the Bayat Power, and I think you heard last night as well, Mr. Ehsan, I understand, got an award. And he continues to be a pioneer in many aspects in Afghanistan. So he actually, together with his team, they are developing this Bayat Power gas power plant. And I think Monty maybe will talk more about it. And as part of this arrangement, of course, they will depend solely on the payment stream that they will have, because they will only have one customer, and that's going to be DAPS. So clearly, when you have only one customer, you sell all your output to one customer, you depend on that customer paying on time. And making sure that that stream of payments is certain is very important for anybody who invests in these kind of projects. And what the World Bank is exploring, how we can actually help, is that we can stand behind this payment obligation of DAPS and the government, since they are jointly in this arrangement, that will say to the investor, well, if the government and DAPS will not be able to pay on time, then we'll come in. And similarly, we are also working within the same kind of like structure and arrangement. What we are trying to explore is also on another actually local investor, Gazanfar Group, who are currently working with our sister institution, IFC, the International Financial Corporation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar. They're also working to develop a new gas power plant that is expected to be located in the Mazar Sharif area. So that is another maybe 50, we are looking around 50 megawatt of new capacity. And the third one, but I'm sure it's not going to be the last and the least, is a hydropower plant, Kajaki. which I don't know many of you know, it's in a quite sensitive territory. It's an old project that has been actually originally developed by the U.S. company and supported by the U.S. aid, but unfortunately it never managed to complete it at full construction. So now the government has partnered with a private investor, a Turkish company, to actually expand the power plant to what was supposed to be its original capacity. And again, saying we are looking how we can find a way how we can actually support these private investors, so we can really make these projects happen. Because in the end, it's all about how you allocate the risk, how you structure it, or like de-risk the project, so you can actually improve the risk profile of the project, which automatically will bring in more investors and financiers, but also improve the bankability. So these are actually just a few examples of what we are doing, but I think one message I want to leave you with is that things are possible. And it is Afghanistan, yes, we know it's a difficult environment, but there are so many other countries that we actually operate and they're quite difficult environment, and we still get things done. What is actually important to see from all this engagement is that bringing together like a government, like a multilateral, like World Bank, and also private investors, we together can think collectively, and through like our own means and instruments that we have at our disposition, we can really work towards making these things happen and really do like some really innovative ideas that ultimate goal is to really help the country with their development. So I'm gonna just stop here, Jeffrey, and be happy to answer any questions.
Why don't you come and have a seat, and then we'll start to have some audience conversation, and I have a few follow-up questions too.
Yes.
Try to activate. Thank you very much. You got through a lot in a very short time period. Can we check the mics? Are the mics working? Or
no, this is not.
Testing. There we go. Yours
yes.
Is working, maybe?
Yes. Yeah.
There we go. All right, so I want to open with a couple questions because we've been working on a host of the stuff, of the activities that you talked about. So I wanted to try to touch base on those and kind of give our attendees an update. So technically, Afghanistan is still in a workout situation with the IMF. What is the status, based on the bank meetings this past week, what is the status of their IMF workout? Is it proceeding well? Are we still in a little bit of a critical area? Or are we making big progress maybe that we haven't heard about yet?
Well, I mean, I'm going to have to disclose, I'm probably not the best person to answer this because I haven't necessarily been part of those. But what I want to add, because I have been actually engaged with IMF, especially when we are like the project that I just mentioned in the energy sector that we are supporting, and we have already been engaged with IMF. And why I'm mentioning these projects are because these are the first actually type of like a transaction that the government has entered with the private sector, where the government through the Ministry of Finance does actually guarantee, provide a sovereign guarantee for a lot of like for investments. And given the Afghanistan, I mean, if you look like the government commitment are I mean quite many, which means that in the end, if there is, for example, a default or something wrong happens, for the reason that private sector had nothing to do with, it becomes an obligation on the government to make certain payments, which can equal to the size of the project.
Right.
So from the IMF perspective, clearly, I mean, if you are a country that you depend on your budget like primarily from the donors, clearly IMF wants to make sure and have a say on every commitment. And these are longer term commitments. These are, we're not talking 1 or 2 years, we're talking actually like maybe like, for example, the Mazar and Kajaki, those are like 20-year commitments.
Okay.
So you wanna have these kind of like discussions. And I'm happy to actually report that IMF gave a blessing.
Okay.
For these projects to go through. I mean, the government has already signed the agreements with all three projects, and they would not be able to do that if IMF didn't give its blessing.
Okay.
So by that, I think what this, I mean, I could draw from this is that there is, I mean, a confidence on the IMF side that the government will be able to manage it in macro fiscal space.
Right.
Otherwise, if they had any doubt that this contingent liability, if you wish, would materialize, they would probably have any like reservation in terms of how much they would allow the government to commit commit in terms of its obligations.
So some of us were invited to attend the Brussels Donor Conference, and it was really, I have to be honest, very shocking about how upset the donors were with Afghanistan's performance up until that time. And so we're going to have the Geneva Ministerial Donor Conference in November, just after the American Thanksgiving holiday. And so I'm trying to get a sense for our members, if the IMF feels that we may be making some progress because of their willingness to sign off on these 3 energy deals, then indeed we are turning a corner potentially going forward on a bunch, not just on energy, but we had 4 or 5 new licensees on ICT, 4G, fiber optic liberalization. We've got big projects coming in water and some other industry areas. We've got the export processing zone initiative, which was announced yesterday, and a big MOU signed with the U.S. government and the Afghan government. Greg Huger will be here today from USAID to talk about some new facilities that they're unveiling as well. So I want to give the audience a sense and our attendees a sense that I think we really are seeing substantive movement, especially on the private sector side.
Yeah, and I think that's actually very important to actually, especially to precede the next the conference, right? Because even from the government perspective, they really want to show to the donors like we are doing things differently.
Right.
We are not the same country that continues just to depend purely on the grant money, on the donor funding. We are actually trying, and us also, the honors is on us as well. Like as the World Bank is the mother, like we cannot just give the money. We also have to think how do we build sustainability of the country, and that's why we are also kind of focusing now, like how we can actually use our resources to actually leverage more private sector investments. And this actual approach, I have to say, is not necessarily unique to Afghanistan. We actually are getting more and more pressure, and maybe you heard we had a capital increase last week, and it came with some conditions. And
but a big surprise, because frankly, that is not where I think the administration made people believe they were going, and yet they announced this huge capital increase. So great.
But no, and we have actually even like started talking. I don't know if you have heard, we have now this concept of maximizing finance for development, which is actually the objective is how do we use the limited World Bank public resources to leverage more private sector investments. And to be honest, and if we're doing something in Afghanistan, I mean, we can do it everywhere. And I sometimes get a reaction, I mean, when I tell people that, oh, I'm doing this guarantee project preparing in Afghanistan, like, really, Afghanistan? Like, yes, Afghanistan.
We get that a lot, yes.
Yes, and people get surprised. But I think what's important here is what signals we are sending.
Right.
And that's what I was saying earlier, like, if we together sit down and work, and I mean, and we send the signals that actually things can be done. And this the signal goes to other interested potential investors, but also to the donor community.
Right, exactly.
Because they see, okay, this is not just the same game repeating itself. Actually, we are entering into a new era. We are thinking differently. How do we actually bring in more of these investments?
So we have a number of members who are Afghan banks, and they are very frustrated. So when we meet with them, they talk about it's not just a capacity issue, they think, in their central bank system. They talk, just giving one example, they talk about the high coupon rate that's being paid for their deposits means that they're not willing to lend out to anybody else as a result. Then they put their money in the banks and then in dollars, and they try to go access those dollars to build an addition onto a factory, and they'll only get Afghani money out. They'll only be given Afghani money out. So they are frustrated. They think that there are issues that the central bank is not able to solve on their own with their own technical capacity now, and they've seen these because these bankers travel and they have a very, very profound network in Central Asia, and they know that other places have learned how to solve those problems either through bank assistance or through even some of the larger global banks that will come in and offer them some technical assistance and support to solve these.
So what we actually are doing, I think on the access to finance, and that's our finance, we have a finance and market team who actually work on these. So we are actually using IDA resources to kind of provide like a line of credit to the local banks. So kind of like a source for them to lend. So they don't necessarily depend purely on the deposits to create their assets, to lend to the businesses, but then there is this other other kind of pocket, if you wish,
Okay.
of the funds that they can actually work and build the capacity, but also stimulate the economy.
Okay.
And because clearly, I mean, the rates, I mean, become a different issue because then, you know, the source of your funding
Right.
is completely different. It's not like you're paying high deposit rate
Right.
for that money. So because you're not doing that, then the terms that you provide to extend the loans to your borrowers are also more convenient for them. Could
Right.
be more like a better
So
target.
will the programs that you described in your opening remarks, will the stuff that you're going to be doing in that access to finance area start to address some of these issues?
It
Could
is,
we invite
yeah.
those bankers? We want to try to bring later in
Yeah.
the year a mission of the bankers over.
I think so. I think
I really
so.
think
yeah.
it's time,
Yeah.
you know?
No. Absolutely. And I think what would be good to also have someone from the central bank because we
Okay.
cannot talk about just the commercial banks
Right, right.
without having a central bank in the room as
Right,
well.
right.
And because we are working with both, I think it's actually very important to bring have a session just
Yeah.
on a banking side and definitely I think I can introduce you to the colleagues
Okay,
who actually
that would be great.
do spend a lot of time because I was even talking to them. I was like, hey, can we think about maybe, I mean, through this work that you're doing, we can find some maybe local currency tranche financing for even these energy
Right,
projects
right.
that we are doing, because one thing we have to be cognizant about is, especially on these big infrastructure projects, is the foreign exchange risk, because when you build this kind of infrastructure, a lot of money comes from abroad, and the financiers or like lenders, whether it's sponsors or lenders, they want to be repaid in a foreign, their currency. I mean, if the money is in dollar, everybody wants to be repaid in dollar, but then in the end, the difference between the exchange rate is still going to be borne either by the government or the end user of the product. So I was actually even thinking about that, how we can maybe even bringing some local currency financing.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we can talk. Oh, we have questions in the audience too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Let me go there first. Sorry.
Yes, Jack Pagano, retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and broadcaster in Afghanistan. How are you weeding out corruption and graft? I see it every day. What are you doing to solidify the notion that deals are not made under the table?
Yeah. No, I mean, of course, we deal with this actually not just in Afghanistan, in every country. So for us, what is important, like that we work with on the private sector side. We try to make sure that there are credible parties. We actually do our due diligence on the private investor party to make sure that it's not an entity that is keen or prone to be involved in the corrupted practices. It's actually, we call it our integrity due diligence, and in every support that we do for the private sector, we run the check. I mean, we will not proceed if we even hear during our investigation that or due diligence that there has been some indication to that extent. So that's as far as our due diligence goes. But of course, on the government side, I mean, for us, if you control the private sector, then I mean, you kind of control the government as well. And because we are actually on these, and I'm going to only speak in terms of these, the context of the project that I'm directly involved, because I know we have a team on the governance that looks at the broadly in the governance sector. But I'm not familiar like exactly how they tackle it. But in terms of where we do this kind of come in between the government and the private sector, there we are involved very, very closely with both private sector and the government. We try to participate on every conversation, whether it's formal or informal. I mean, we review all the documents, and if we see there's something not very standard in the document, or like pretty much we try to make sure we follow the money. We make sure that we do that. So and hopefully you create these kind of examples, and it's about also like a building kind of like the peer pressure, because for any company who wants to actually do this kind of project and they work with the World Bank, benefit from the World Bank presence or support, there will be like the standards they need to meet. So that is.
And with the establishment of the National Procurement Office,
Yes.
NPA, that is supposed to offer more transparency,
Exactly.
compliance, and so forth. And the bank, I'm sure, is monitoring that office's
Yeah,
decision making, because most of these large transactions now are going through that office.
Oh yeah, they actually on these projects that I just mentioned, they had to go several times
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I think Monty will probably know you
Okay.
yeah, because they would present and the NPA wouldn't be satisfied. They would go back, do some more work. So it is actually quite. I mean, getting through that milestone is an important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We're very happy to hear it. One of the things that we talked a lot about yesterday was export promotion and a focus on trying to facilitate greater exports to the region. And one of the things I was wondering is what bank facilities are you using now to help on the export promotion side for some of the competitive industries?
So we are actually working on a new operation, which I think I maybe forgot to mention, on agribusiness. So we are looking to, and this is new, like we are still preparing it, to prepare like agribusiness charter actually. And the purpose of this is going to be focusing on two aspects. There is one on the business side, and then there is the trade side. And on the trade side, we are looking especially on the sanitary and the phytosanitary kind of standards and making sure, because as I think many of you, Afghanistan has the WTO, is part of the WTO agreement. So for any exports, especially agriculture, which we know, I mean, it's quite a significant sector in Afghanistan, you have to kind of meet certain standards. So in order to qualify your trade, your export that falls within the WTO, because that's where you get the credibility, that's where you get the protection, and the kind of that like a quality stamp. So we are actually working on that right now to develop these.
Will that be through the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock, or directly through the Finance Ministry? Or?
No, it's my sense is actually, I can't remember, but my sense it would be either through both Ministry of Agriculture, but also Trade, because they work.
Commerce and Industry.
Yes, so they usually, sometimes depending on the project, but we might have two kind of line ministries that we work with. I mean, Minister of Finance is like the final, the minister that we usually sign our agreements.
Minister, I call him Minister Habibi, he's the Director General for Civil Aviation Authority. Yesterday he talked about trying to figure out ways to integrate the financing component into the export processing zone concept, and I know USAID is going to talk today about some of their facilities, but I think there's an opening there for the bank also to look at that as well, because that could be, if we're doing these 5 major airports, and we hope to get these rolling in the next 12 months or 18 months, there is a huge opportunity for our businessmen and women to participate in that.
No, absolutely. And I think and maybe I just go back to the PPP framework, because I think once you build like these facilities, especially if it's like an airport or things like that, one way is that you bring in also a private company to manage it.
Right, a concessionaire.
Like a concessionaire, and the good thing is that now Afghanistan has a PPP law, so which helps, has kind of opens the way for the government to do things properly.
So when you talked about the PPP office that the bank has that's facilitating, are they working directly with Afghanistan's PPP office in any way? Yeah. So what would be good for our businessmen and women to know about how to work with that office if they had a model that really is made for a PPP instead of a direct investment, for example? What should they do?
So I think because the authority that sits, the PPP Central Authority, is like an office that sits in the Ministry of Finance. They are like the key contact point for any PPP project. So I think that would be the first person, or like the stop to make if you're thinking about these initiatives. But at the same time, you need a pipeline, right? I mean, one is to put the framework and then mechanisms in place. The other one is actually to have a pipeline of these projects, right?
Deals,
and the way how this pipeline is developed, sometimes the government has ideas, but sometimes the ideas actually come from the private sector.
Right.
And as the private sector, I mean, if you have an idea that you think is going to work, all you need to go is start talking. I mean, you talk maybe to the PPP office, if you believe your project falls within a category, and then they can maybe then bring it to like the government plan. But again, just to go back, I mean, we need to work together.
Right.
And sometimes the government, through their investment planning, they might decide, okay, I need this new road or I need this new airport, and I cannot build it myself. I don't have enough money to build it myself, so I want to bring in private sector through some concessional arrangement like a PPP to invest. And I think actually there's been some discussions, some very, very early on, that some of my colleagues had maybe 2 weeks ago on a railway, something that the government is looking to actually do some sort of PPP
Oh, really?
which
Okay.
just occurred to me. So
Oh, okay, good.
yeah, I just
In the
remember.
north, or?
I think so.
Okay.
In the north.
We've been hearing
yeah.
a lot about the Chinese and the railways in the north, so
Yeah.
some of our companies would like it to be going maybe to the other side, so we can get out to ports in the Caspian and so forth. Is there any more audience questions? Anybody? Raise your hand, feel free. There we go, down here, Mr. Sarouche, Doug, right in front there. Director General Sarouche is from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just a very quick question. For the large-scale regional projects that usually require huge fund, so the option of co-financing has been pursued under different platforms. And it has also been true with the World Bank recently, co-financing some of the projects with other investment banks.
Yeah.
So how do you see the possibility of having maybe more of co-financing options in place in the case of Afghanistan, for instance, with respect to railway projects or large-scale energy projects, while of course engaging the private sector as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and this is what I was talking. And yeah, for example, the CASA project that I referred to, it is a regional project, and you have IDB, you have World Bank, EIB. I mean, many donors are like investing together. But again, if you look, it's all public resources, right? So, so what we and I mean, I took the examples of the energy because that's where I'm directly involved. But the structure that we are actually exploring and the support that we are exploring in the energy sector can very, very easily be also replicated with other infrastructure, whether it's transport or railway or any airport. And there is actually a lot of ways how we can combine the resources, because through our guarantee instrument in particular, I want to emphasize actually, it's been one of the instruments that has been the most successful in terms of the bringing private sector investments. Like the loans, yes, we do co-finance with probably other development institution or like other international organizations. But when we bring in the guarantee, the purpose is usually to actually bring in private investments. And for example, what I mentioned, the examples that we are exploring in energy is like through some sort of payment guarantee, but we can also do directly loan guarantee where we guarantee commercial lenders directly. The purpose is like, and we have a lot of flexibility, how do we structure it? The purpose and the idea is to try to structure it the way that actually brings the most of the investments, that we provide minimum necessary coverage needed just to make the project bankable. Because in the end, that's where you want to be. For any commercial financiers to come in, they're going to look at the bankability of the project.
Congressman Ritter has a question. Coming with a microphone, 1 sec. There we go.
Yes. Could you describe the most recent World Bank view of energy development in the coal sector?
Well,
or coal development in the energy sector?
Yeah. Well, it's not necessarily new. I mean, coal. I mean, we've been phasing out of the coal for the several years now, and I don't know if you saw maybe like recently there was an announcement by the World Bank that they are exception, but also like they want to phase out of the fossil fuels in general in the next few years, and the coal. So technically, coal is still allowed, but I mean, the test is really strong.
Let me point out something crucial, because I know you understand the politics of this. India and China have been building hundreds of 1,000-megawatt type of power plants over the last decade. The CO2 climate change impact, whether you believe in it or not, is phenomenal. And a small, poor country like Afghanistan has been wiped out of the calculus of international financial institutions, yours being the biggest, for the last 8 years. Certainly the policy evolved over that time. And is it changing? Is it adapting? Because we have heard, Jeff, we have heard different perspectives. Now you're talking about phasing out fossil fuels. I mean, when the development of a country like Afghanistan is absolutely dependent on fossil fuels, I mean,
No.
it doesn't
No, I
make
mean,
sense.
Annette came to the September 2016 Energy Conference in Dubai in Afghanistan, and she announced that they had made a decision that Afghanistan would be the only exception for clean coal development of any of the countries.
Well,
So-
I was gonna add. So we still have, and as I said, I mean, it's technically still possible. It's just that, I mean, yes, clean coal. I mean, has to be. So you have to test
Right
that. Is it
technology, yeah.
okay, clean coal, which clearly we're talking here about supercritical, ultra supercritical, which is kind of the clean side of the coal. And of course, in the very, very low income, like poor countries,
Right.
where this is, I mean, it's really the last best option for the country to provide, and the cheapest source to provide. So if you look at, there is a special guidelines, how do we do the coal projects, and I'm going to have to say, so we still have one coal project in our pipeline, and it is in my country, and I'm from Kosovo. Equally, even smaller, and actually we depend 90% on coal for our electricity.
Wow.
Yes, and we have our. That's the only thing we have in terms of the reserves. We have no gas. I mean, we don't have a big hydro capacity. That's really the only thing we have. And we've been trying to actually develop kind of same through private sector investments. But I mean, there was actually also like the way how we structured the project. I mean, the government wanted to go big from the very beginning, and it kind of added a lot of complexities. So the project still is in the pipeline. The bank has not canceled it because it's, I think, kind of also grandfathered, but they also understand that it is. I mean, we already done a lot of these justifications, but now, I mean, given all these like burden that people have like on like proving and getting through the board, and I have to say, even our board, especially the U.S. the executive director of the board, they are the most difficult to convince about a call. And now you have also maybe the Nordic ones. So even if the team on the ground wants to do it, because things that are about us that put so much pressure and make it so difficult that sometimes we are forced to explore all other opportunities and options. So we can tell them, we can say, look, yes, we checked the gas, yes, we checked the hydro, yes, we did all these, and still there is a gap, and this gap, the best filled with a coal. So technically, if you say it is possible, but practically it's very, very difficult.
For bank participation in a coal transaction, doesn't mean private equity couldn't do coal.
Exactly.
It just means the bank role would be diminished.
We have another question back here,
yeah.
if we could switch topics.
The risk issue of Afghanistan, you need IFC in that mix in order to attract any European or even Indian or American type investment.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Congressman, I don't have any better answer for you other than there is.
Yeah, he wants us to work on this. I get it.
Yes.
I get it.
We'll try.
Okay.
I mean,
Keith?
Hi, Keith Alanis, Rumi Spice. We work with a number of farmers and small and medium enterprises in our business, and a big impediment to the expansion of their operations is their access to capital. The interest rates that the banks are able to lend, even against, for loans that are even collateralized against equipment and real property, are not, not feasible for. It just doesn't make business sense. So we get in the business of lending them money ourselves, or advancing payment. It's not really a loan. Can you speak to what the international community can do, or the Afghanistan banking system can do to bring down these rates and ease like access to capital in the form of small business loans or lines of credit? To these SMEs?
So actually,
So just so you know, Keith and Rumi are one of the most successful exporters of agriculture from Afghanistan to the United States, principally in the area of saffron and related products. So.
Congratulations. No, well, Keith, just to go back maybe just to what I said earlier, that we are, I mean, through our resources, like we are actually trying to help the local banks to create this separate kind of line of credit that they can just on lend in a better terms. Because as we were saying earlier, clearly, if you look like where the banks are getting the money, right, they get it from the deposits. And they have to be careful how they are managing the deposits, and they have higher interest rates to those deposits because you need to incentivize people to put the money in the bank. And I'm sure, I mean, in a lot of countries similar to Afghanistan, I mean, people are still prefer to keep cash under the pillow, right? So you have to kind of work and create this comfort that, okay, people can actually use the banks for their savings. So then the businesses can also benefit from the loans. But until you get to like a level where there is a more liquidity in the market, I mean, the bank is actually working to try to actually like boost this liquidity, because it's all about that, right? I mean, you need to boost the liquidity in the market so that, because when there is a liquidity, then it automatically reduces the rates, because then there is just a flow, I mean, of the money, it's faster. So we've been working on that side, but I think what Jeffrey, you mentioned, I mean, I think what's going to be helpful, and unfortunately, I don't have my finance and market colleagues to talk about this that actually are working with the local banks to just talk to you more in details what exactly we're doing and how we're trying to facilitate. But it's a very, very good point. And I think maybe, Jeffrey, your idea to have a follow-up session where it's only with the local banks and bringing the World Bank, what the World Bank is actually doing. But the good thing is that we are present in the space, we are working on it, and maybe it's just a matter of timing before we get to something. But I could also maybe share the contact of my colleagues for the finance and markets, so you can reach out directly to them.
Okay.
Maybe they are working with the banks that you're not familiar with, or because you want to know which banks they are also working directly with that are benefiting from this additional liquidity.
Our next panel is going to be on energy, power, and infrastructure, and one of our speakers will be Mr. Nasseri, who is the COO of DABS. And those of us who've been involved in Afghanistan for a number of years, DABS has come a long way, but it's still got a long way to go. We understand that. Is the bank's position that we should try to perfect the capacity of DABS prior to a privatization of DABS, or is the bank's position that at any point that a private investor is interested in DABS as an opportunity for investment, that the bank would welcome helping to do that? Yeah. Have you taken a position on this yet?
So we don't have a specific position in terms of the privatization. What we are actually focusing on, because I mean, just by mean of these engagement in the energy sector where you have these private investors coming in, their day-to-day relationship is going to be with DABS.
Okay.
So for us, building that capacity within DABS is actually very important. Okay. One is from just managing the company perspective. Okay. The second is from the planning, that actually the DABS, when they plan their investment program, and also to increase the revenue collection, that they are well fitted and equipped to do that. Okay. But then it's also from the financing perspective, because so what I mentioned earlier, so we will consider providing some sort of payment guarantee, because clearly, I mean, from these investors, I mean, if you have only one customer, it's very important if that customer has money to make the payment for the electricity you're going to be selling. And for us, even though we're providing that guarantee, for us it's not just enough to provide the guarantee. We actually going to look internally, like at the DABS first, what the DABS needs to be a credit-worthy entity, and we are actually looking at the financing aspect, what we can do to strengthen the finance team, so they know how to manage their resources. And maybe it's not necessarily Afghanistan specific, but what we have seen in other countries in the utilities that kind of are at the early stage, you have a planning team and then you have a finance team. And there is not a big coordination among these two teams. Like, so the planning team, they plan the investments. Oh, we need to build this substation. We need to build this power plant, or especially in the vertical integrated. And then they go to the finance team and say, okay, I need this much money. Right. And then the finance team struggles. They go talk to maybe World Bank, ADB, or any other financiers, even commercial. They say, hey, I need this much money. But there is no proper strategy or like overall kind of position to say, okay, we need this much to invest, this is how we're going to fund it, kind of to do like a optimized funding approach. Right. But we are now trying to build this capacity from early on. Okay. And I think honestly for DABS, so we haven't had this discussion on the privatization with my team, but at least I personally think that it would be worth to try to explore to strengthen the capacity of the company first before you think about privatizing. Okay. Because otherwise, then you don't get any value for the company.
Well, we have the Afghan government right now is pushing a lot of solar deals. Some of them are on grid, some of them are off grid, and I'm not confident that the off-grid ones are bankable deals yet based on the structure of them that I've seen. So the guarantees that you're talking about for DABs to me are the way in the short term for these companies to invest and work.
Yeah, and just I'm going to say the guarantee is actually also meant to be a more like intermediary kind of support.
Right.
So because we want to make sure that at some point then utility or like the off-taker becomes strong enough so they won't need any backstopping or enhancement of their credit worthiness to actually do this deal, that then they will be just able to do it on their own. But sometimes we cannot do things in sequence. We have to approach them in a parallel way. So, okay, at this point we know that DAOs by themselves, they can't, it's very difficult for them to actually bring in all these investments.
Right, right.
So we support them through enhancement of their credit worthiness and credibility. But then at some point, if we continue also to work and strengthen their capacity, then maybe at some point they get independent.
Okay. All right, great. Tuta, thank you so much for coming this morning. Very informative. I'm sure everybody here will want to reach out to you at some point. Feel free to stay if you'd like for a few minutes to listen to our next panel that Congressman Ritter is going to host. This is on energy, power, and infrastructure investments with Monty Simas from Bayat Energy and Bayat Group, Mr. Wakil Nasiri, the COO of DABS, and Dr. Fei Yu from the Asian Development Bank and the Deputy North American Representative. If they could come up and join us now. Thank you.
I want to welcome everybody today. I think we have a reasonable quorum for our meeting and not overly large amounts of drop-offs. Let's call this, for our Afghan visitors, it's called the second day syndrome, where other things come into play during their visit. But we're delighted that you're all here this morning. This panel, I think Jeff and the representative of the World Bank had a good discussion on some of the energy issues. And what we're going to do is go into greater detail on energy, power, and infrastructure. Our first panelist is engineer Wakil Nasiri. Wakil and I go way back to the beginning of the Afghanistan Brishna Shirkat DABs, which fundamentally sought to transform the electricity industry, the electric power capacity of the country was so essential. Why? Because basically a warlord was in charge of the energy and water ministry, and things could not get done, and if they got done, it was very difficult to get them done, and there was all kinds of difficulties along the way, and, you know, welcome to Afghanistan. Well, DABS, USAID worked with the Afghan government to create this utility regulatory agency. And this agency has become more and more capable of dealing with electric power production, pricing, the distribution issues, and we're very thankful that we have an agency like this within the Afghan government. Now, Amanullah Ghalib, who is the CEO, was called away at the last moment. He was to be here, but he has sent in his place engineer Wakil Nasiri, who is with DABS from the beginning, is an extremely well-educated, capable electrical engineer who has his fingers on the pulse as the chief operating officer of DABS. So we're going to start with engineer Wakil to give us this overview. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to everybody. For this conference, I selected a video presentation which was prepared jointly by DAPS and MEW. I would like to first play this video, then we will discuss some other issues. Please play that video.
Afghanistan Energy Sector, the Ministry of Energy and Water. Currently, Afghanistan Power Sector is governed by the Ministry of Energy and Water and operated by the National Electricity Utility to Afghanistan Breshna Shirkat. The Ministry of Energy and Water plays a key role towards power sector development in Afghanistan. It is currently mandated to plan, develop, and implement policy initiatives, manage the quality and reliability of the national power system, regulate the power sector, expand the country's generation and transmission infrastructure, improve national energy efficiency and conservation, raise public awareness, conduct research and development. The energy sector. Afghanistan lies in the heart of Asia, bonding together 6 countries that share its borders: Pakistan, China, Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Its strategic location along the Silk Route puts it in a great position to link the markets of South Asia, the Middle East, Central Asia, and China as a transit and transport hub. Energy access is a high development priority for the government and is the second priority after rule of law. The government of Afghanistan recognizes that long-term sustainability of the country's power sector would largely depend on its ability to become self-reliant and self-sufficient in power generation. The government is increasingly laying emphasis on widening the scope of private sector participation for development of power generation resources. The National Energy Policy sets out a plan for development of power generation resources of medium to large size. The Power Services Regulation Act explicitly allows for private sector involvement in the generation and provision of electricity services. Afghanistan's Sustainable Development Goal enshrines private sector participation, both domestic and foreign. The Renewable Energy Policy focuses on several aspects of the energy sector, including, but not limited to, engaging with the private sector, financing, and tariff rationalization for renewable energy projects. The Energy Efficiency Policy is a timely initiative that facilitates a private investment-led energy efficiency market in long term. The Afghanistan Energy Investment Policy and the Afghanistan Feed-in Tariff Policy are in the process of being formally approved. Current Electricity Network System. Afghanistan's current electricity network system is categorized into 4 networks, which supply 9 different power grids or islands: Northeast Power System, NEPS, Southeast Power System, SEPS, Herat Zone linking Iran, and the Turkmenistan system. Afghanistan's electricity consumption per capita. Afghanistan's electricity consumption stands at 195 kilowatt-hours per year per person, which is low as compared to South Asia's average of 667 kilowatt-hours per year per person and the global average electricity usage of 3,100 kilowatt-hours per year per person. Access to electricity. The energy sector has witnessed major progress since 2002. In 2002, only 6% of Afghans had access to electricity. Today, approximately over 40% have access. Enhancing access to about 85% over the next 5 years is a high priority of the government. Power generation and transmission profile. Afghanistan has a total generation capacity of around 1,627 megawatts. Currently, the total installed generation capacity of the Afghanistan power system stands at 615 megawatts, out of which hydropower constitutes 53%, while diesel heavy fuel oil-based thermal power plants constitute 35%, diesel generators constitute 12%, and 8% of power generation comes from renewable energy sources. Over 1,000 megawatts of total electricity supply is imported from neighboring countries, which constitutes almost 3/4 of the total energy consumption. Power generation resources potential. Afghanistan is building its energy sector to provide the backbone for its socio-economic development. The Ministry of Energy and Water has outlined plans to source 5,000 megawatts, or 95% of the country's electricity supply, from domestic renewable energy resources by 2032. Afghanistan is endowed with significant renewable power generation resources. It has renewable energy potential of solar energy, 222,000 megawatts, wind energy, 67,000 megawatts, hydropower, 23,000 megawatts, and biomass, 4,000 megawatts. It also has large gas reserves that can be gainfully exploited for power generation. The technical resource potential maps, namely solar, wind, hydropower, and biomass resource potential maps, developed by the Ministry of Energy and Water, provide information on the renewable energy potential and installed generation capacity in Afghanistan. Planned power generation projects. In order to reduce reliance on electricity imports and to boost private sector investment, the Ministry of Energy and Water has released the Energy Sector 5-Year Plan, which includes power generation and transmission projects. Total estimated investment requirement. The total investment requirement for generation and transmission projects is estimated at $6 billion. The current commitment of the Afghan government and development partners make up about $1.5 to $2 billion of the total investment requirement. The funding gap of $4 to $4.5 billion is expected to be covered by 50 to 60% from donors, 30% from investment by private sector, and the remaining 10% will come from the government. A uniform integrated power grid. Currently, Afghanistan's power network system is not integrated, which is important for reliable power supply. To ensure security and reliability in supply, a single integrated grid will be established by forming a 500 kilovolt ring linking the 9 different islands. The 220 kilovolt and 110 kilovolt substations and transmission lines will further deliver power to the provinces and districts respectively. The black spots and lines show existing substations. The green spots and lines show funded substations. The pink lines show unfunded substations. By 2020, domestic power generation will increase over 2,000 megawatts. Power generation from renewable energy will reach 500 megawatts. Around 1,000 technicians will be graduated. The new developments will bring in up to 20,000 jobs in the energy sector. Up to 60,000 indirect employment opportunities will be created. Why invest in Afghanistan's energy sector? There is huge potential for developing power projects. A strong government commitment for investment climate reform. Political commitment to principles of free market economy and private sector development. A free market economy led by private sector initiatives. Rapid economic growth. GDP growth from $2.2 billion in 2002 to $21.8 billion in 2014. Improved legal and institutional framework for investment. Flexible tax and duty regime. 20% corporate tax, 0% duty on import of machinery, and 1% duty on import of raw materials. 100% foreign ownership. No restriction on profit repatriation. Foreign investors can lease real estate for periods of up to 90 years for arable land or longer for non-arable land. Allocation of requisite land. Security assistance. Afghanistan's energy sector is on the move. Come and invest today.
Thank you for watching and listening this video. As you listen from the video, right now in Afghanistan there is a good opportunity for the investment. Right now DAPS and MEW have a lot of projects for the investment. For example, in the hydro sector, we have Surubi 2. Surubi 2 is the best project which don't need reservoir. It is very easy work to complete within 1 or 2 years because it's just a diversion and 16 kilometers tunnels. The same, we have another project like Kama, Baghdara, Talai Mama, Sagai, Shal, and Olambagh hydropower plant. The complete information of this power plant is available with me, and after decision, I will be here for any technical question regarding to these projects. The same of this project, we have solar powers for Para solar, Kabul rooftop solar plant, Naglu solar power plant. This is also a very economic projects which are under the process of MEW and DAPS right now. In the Herat, we have some other projects which is for wind. In the Mazar province, Parwan province, we have plan for the wind power plant. We have planned for coal power plant in the Ashpushta, in the Risuf, Sabzak, and some Ashpushta, the Risuf, and Sabzak areas. Currently, DAPS has a significant shortage of power. We have import power from Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Tajikistan, as you see, but this is not sufficient power for the peoples. During the winter, we have more than 50% shortage of power, and all the time we're using we say parchavid, load shedding. The load shedding is more than 50% for the peoples. So as the expert of World Bank said, right now we are trying for the stable power in Kabul. The best way is to invite the investor to come in Afghanistan for the IPP projects. I would like to say thanks for the Bayat power, which they started at least for 50 megawatts. The same of Bayat Ghazanfar started for 50 megawatts. I hope they will increase this up to 200, maybe more than 200 megawatts. The same 77 construction company, they started for 100 megawatts hydro. In Kandahar area, 77, and another Afghan company, they started for 30 megawatts solar right now. I hope the other investor come to Afghanistan and develop the existing system of power. Thank you. I have no other discussion. If you have some question, please.
Thank you, Wakil Jan. Our next panelist will be familiar to you since he was a panelist yesterday, but he is a key executive for Afghanistan as the top gun for Bayat Group, both in telecom and energy and power, and will discuss with us the Bayat gas project, which is 99.99% accepted, or has it gotten to 100%?
Oh, we're making great progress.
Okay, great. So Monty Simas is a Yale graduate. He has got a Harvard master's degree in public policy. He's got 25 years experience in that part of the world, internationally, but particularly in and about Afghanistan. And he is well known to AACC, having been with us pretty much from the beginning of these matchmaking conferences as a key player in the Bayat group. So Monty, going to talk about gas. By the way, gas, I barely saw it in that video. Yet gas right now is the #1 new source. We heard from the World Bank person that they're looking to phase out fossil fuels when India and China are building hundreds of 1,000 megawatt power plants, coal-fired. I mean, whoa. Monty.
Congressman Ritter, thank you for those kind words. Fellow panelists and Engineer Nazari, thank you for noting our project and providing a wonderful presentation on DABS. Good morning, all. I don't have slides. I've just prepared a few short remarks. First, by way of introduction, the Bayat Group, as some of you may know, we're the largest private American investor in Afghanistan. We had our start back in 2002 in the field of mobile telephony. We've been focused on building what we call enabling infrastructure since that time, both physical infrastructure as well as human capital. So our other businesses and other organizations include Ariana Television and Radio in the media field. The Bayat Foundation is a very active philanthropic organization that's focused on maternal and early childhood health, education for girls, and food security. We have been looking at the energy sector for a number of years. In fact, we first started contemplating energy back in 2005. But at that time, the market wasn't quite ready. The transmission infrastructure hadn't been rebuilt, and there was other work that we had to get focused on. So before I dive into the projects that we are undertaking, I just want to confirm that, so we've looked at gas-fired technology. That's what I'll talk about today. And it's just important for me to emphasize that this is not a new industry to Afghanistan. If you trace back decades to the Soviet era, the Soviets found Afghanistan and that part of the world first in Afghanistan. They exported a significant amount of natural gas back to the former Soviet Union at that time. I think almost 3 trillion cubic feet of gas, an extensive network of pipelines. And in fact, and it's to our benefit today, they did a wonderful job of training Afghans in the natural gas sector. So you can find a lot of expertise in Shawrgan and Mazar, people that know how pipelines are built, operated, how gas wells are drilled, serviced, functioned. So there's a lot of there's a great repository of knowledge in the country. Okay, so to our project. So when we were contemplating entering the power space, we had 5 goals that Dr. Bayat set out. The first was that we wanted to develop what we called a true sort of Afghan-oriented, Afghan-owned exploration, production, and generation company. We were not going into the distribution business because DABS, by our measure, and over the years, had really evolved and was doing an effective job of distribution. Our second goal at the time was to build a business that was not only commercially sustainable, but also that would develop a recurring source of revenue for the government in 2 senses, in terms of gas sales as well as in tax revenues. The third goal at the time was to develop a project that would help share DABS's or help DABS meet its goal of providing a stable, reliable source of electricity domestically generated. We wanted to launch this business, launch this industry, in fact, with our risk capital. So the Bayat Group has, as I mentioned yesterday, we like to pioneer sectors that people know there's a great need and are important, but perhaps for various reasons, initial capital is hesitant to start. And finally, the 5th goal that we had was, to the extent possible, we wanted to build a business that would leverage the contribution and investment made by the United States in Afghanistan, and by so doing, if we could source equipment and source expertise from the United States. So in October of 2016, after a lot of work, a lot of discussion with DABS and Ministry of Mines and Petroleum and Ministry of Energy and Water, in fact at Brussels, the government announced a 3-phase project. It's a 200 plus megawatt project, approximately $250 million investment. And the first phase of that is what I call Bayat Power 1. And the power purchase agreement for Bayat Power 1 was signed almost exactly 30 days ago, late March of this year. And we've been working closely with DABS and the counterparties as well at Afghan Gas to piece together this gas-fired generation project. To quickly give you a sense of the details of the project, and I'll be here all day so I can happily talk in greater granularity if you like. We've decided to do something which we call fast power. So I think you may have heard, some of you may have heard Dr. Bayat talk yesterday. Our philosophy is to start small and start quickly. So in first phase, which is 40 megawatts, a little more than 40 megawatts, we'll actually bring in mobile turbines. They can be operational and power can be running within 120 days of the final documentation. The units are coming, we're partnered with Siemens. The units will be coming from Houston, Texas. So we're quite proud that that this technology will be built and creating jobs in Houston. And it's shrink wrapped, it's ready to go, so hopefully we'll have power running before the end of summer. That's a quick context of our goals, the group, the industry, but I just wanted to reflect on a few sort of lessons and perspectives that we have related to the development of power projects. First, we view this sector as being much bigger than just energy. So I see this sort of as the opportunity to have networks, 3 different networks converge. So you're going to have the convergence of the energy network, the financial network, and the telephony network. And DABS has done already and has really interesting plans in terms of using IoT and other technologies to manage the grid, to modernize the grid, and monitor it. The second perspective I'd like to share with you is that I think there's great virtue in what we call the crawl, walk, run philosophy, which is it's very enticing to develop and generate large-scale projects, right? The Big Bang approach. But in this sector in particular, in Afghanistan in general, I think it's always really difficult to de-risk and structure projects that can meet a financial close if you have a particular investor. So in our case, we are we are our own investor, but even I have to sort of justify to my management. But if you can piece together a project or a strategy where you start small and then you build quickly, it seems to be very effective. Everyone is proof of concept, everyone develops confidence. We didn't start out with a 20-year PPA, we started out with a 5-year PPA. So everyone is sort of understanding and developing the capability inside the government in terms of monitoring and managing and sustaining this project. The third perspective I want to share is that we've had a wonderful dialogue with counterparties. So we've been working very closely with Engineer Ghalib and Engineer Nasri and the team at DABS. They've been fantastic to work with. Afghan Gas Ministry of Mines, even the PPP team at the Office of the President and Ministry of Finance, right? It's a very complex group of counterparties involved. And that's just in Afghanistan. Outside Afghanistan, we've been working closely with TUTA and the World Bank team. I've had lots of conversations with the USAID team. They've been very supportive. OPIC. So you've got a lot of there are a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but this is really an interesting example of government, private sector, and international organizations working together to help Afghanistan develop this key sector. And the last perspective I just want to share is that this is one project. It's a gas-fired project. The Afghan government has the interesting hydro opportunities. They've got some solar projects on the go. This is really a growing field. I mean, I've heard conversations about battery storage projects, wind projects, so it's really a wide open area, and I'd welcome all to join. There's a lot of need, a lot of commercial investment opportunities. Thank you.
Our third panelist is the deputy here for the North American Regional Office of the Asian Development Bank. AACC has had a close relationship with the Asian Development Bank over the years. One of the previous narrow North American representative office chief was Craig Stephenson, who spent some, I think, almost 6 years in Kabul as a deputy and then the representative in Kabul. So Ms. Fei Yu is the deputy, as I mentioned, and she has a wide-ranging experience in Asia, and was assigned to the Beijing office and is quite familiar with China's influence in the region, their economic empowerment of many businesses in the region, including Afghanistan. So, Fei, would you please come to the podium?
Thank you, Congressman Ritter, for the introduction. Today I will give a brief overview of what ADB does in Afghanistan, the energy sector. But before I start with the energy sector, I just want to say a few things about ADB for those of you who are not familiar with us. So we are a multilateral development bank based in Manila, the Philippines, and we have 48 member countries that are based in Asia and 67 member countries altogether, including donors. Last year, we approved the total approved investment and grants was 20 billion, and we were also able to mobilize 12 billion in terms of co-financing, including both official ODA co-financing and also commercial co-financing. So in Afghanistan, ADB has been a leading partner, especially in terms of infrastructure and regional cooperation. So for infrastructure, energy certainly is a big part of the infrastructure portfolio that ADB has in Afghanistan. So to date, we still have an active portfolio of over 3 billion in Afghanistan, and energy and transport are account for the largest chunks of this. So we just approved a new strategy, country partnership strategy for Afghanistan over the period of 2017 to 2021. So this strategy defines what we will do in Afghanistan in the next 5 years. The sectors remain similar as in the areas that we've worked on before, including energy, transport, agriculture, and natural resources. So under this new country partnership strategy, ADB will provide 887 million in grants to Afghanistan. So this average is about over 200 million a year. So in terms of private sector development, the role that we play on the one hand is basically to promote overall economic development and also promote infrastructure development, which are enabling conditions for the private sector to come in and find projects that are profitable. In terms of capacity building, we have also given lots of grants through technical assistance projects to expand and enhance the capacity of various ministries, including the energy ministry. And we are also providing we are also mobilizing one PPP specialist who will be working with the government especially on TAPI-related issues. So these are the capacity building efforts on the part of ADB. In terms of investments, so for a country like Afghanistan, the advantage is that usually there's untapped natural resources, unmet demand, and the need for reconstruction. So we work in all these areas in Afghanistan. Our current portfolio is primarily through through grants. So they are largely public sector. But as I said earlier, that we are in discussion with the government regarding how we will support the TAPI, and which would involve some equity financing through ADB. So that's still under discussion. So in terms of our grant portfolio, we have the main projects in the energy sector are under what's called the CAREC program, so the Central Asia Economic Cooperation Program. So under the CAREC program, the energy sector is a main thrust of regional cooperation. Under this regional cooperation program, many of you probably already know, the most important projects include TAPI, TUTAP. So these two have been going on for a while. I'll just give a quick update. So the TAPI the TAPI project has already started. We had a groundbreaking ceremony. Our DG of Director General of Central Asia attended the groundbreaking ceremony. And the next step is to consider how ADB will finance equity investment in this initiative. So the other program, TUTAP, it's also we have also been providing a lot of support. So currently the progress to date, this TUTAP is, I think most of you are familiar with this, is a 220 kilowatt transmission line. So the Tajikistan and Uzbekistan line of the TUTAP, 220 kilowatt transmission line is energized in 2007, and the Turkmenistan lines to Kabul, which includes 4 contracts of transmission lines and substations, has been awarded. So we expect that these lines will be completed by 2020. This is the part that we are involved in. So in terms of TAPI, I already mentioned that we're considering some potential PPP arrangement. We are also considering one project in terms of solar development. Say the solar development project is involves an investment total of 40,000 million. This is also through grants.
40 million?
40 million, yeah. A new project.
Are those grants directly to the Ministry of Energy and Water, or is that the way that works? Are they on budget?
These projects, usually we have our own procurement procedures. Yeah. So, by the way, we're also working with the procurement authorities in Afghanistan to improve their procedures and also speed up the procurement process.
But the evaluation and award of these projects in solar are ADB and the consumer, the client, or are they ADB and the government, ADB and the client through the government, through Ministry of Public Works or Ministry of Energy and Water? How does that work?
It will be through the government.
Through the government,
yeah.
Yeah. So ADB funds the government, and then the government deals with the allocation of the project.
Yeah, but our role is to make sure that project due diligence all checks out. So
could you review the specific infrastructure projects that are up for bid this year with, say, Ministry of Public Works or whatever government ministry there is? What are the basic infrastructure investments that you guys are making in this upcoming year? Things like the Salang Road bypass. I mean, what are the specific projects? Because that's what our audience here is very interested in.
Okay, I will start with one of the energy projects. Okay. So there's another energy project which I haven't finished yet. So it's TAP, so Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, 500 kilowatt transmission line. So this is a project that involves an investment of estimated about 300 million. So this is still in our pipeline. I'm not sure whether the bidding process have started yet, but this is something to watch for. So there will be a number of contracts and procurement packages structured under this project, which is half funded from our grants and half funded from a Afghanistan Infrastructure Trust Fund. So that's one project in our pipeline, and the other projects in our pipeline, I'm not sure about the stages of these projects, but I'll just mention these projects and the total investment that's involved. Some of them, one is a railway connectivity project. This is 200 million, and
which this is from Mazar-e Sharif to Where is that? It's from Mazar or from Hairatan, and extends to China, to a rail connection to Wakhan Peninsula, China. Is that the project you're talking about?
Let me see.
The railway
So-
connectivity. I think it might be.
Yeah, we don't have details here, but these are just listed as pipeline projects.
It's another project which coming 500 kV line from Surkhan of Uzbekistan to Dasht Al-Wan of Polkhumri. That's new funded by ADB.
Yeah. And what about that railway connectivity? 'Cause
Railway.
the railway.
Mhm. The railway is starting from Uzbekistan up to Shibarghan, then from Shibarghan up to Herat. That's also still under negotiation. It's not started yet.
So these are the infrastructure, and we also have a number of natural resources and agriculture projects. I'm not sure
Yes.
whether
What
the audience
what
will be
about
interested in
your
those.
road projects? You have a bunch of construction companies here, and they might be interested.
So will be the ring road. There's a new the Kaiser Lehman Ring Road under this project. So this project there were some implementation issues,
Yes.
and so that is the government is
Right.
trying to work it out. So a new grant was approved in late 2017 to finance the remaining 151-kilometer section from Kaiser to Daribam. So this is also something to watch for. I guess,
What
yeah.
about Salang? They've been talking about that road construction project for many years.
We haven't seen any new projects up for bidding yet, or ready for going ahead.
Will it be coming up for bidding, or is it in the wings, so to speak?
It's not in the pipeline yet.
It's not.
So maybe there are some discussions still going on, but though these are the only ones that we have in the pipeline in the near future.
Good.
Yeah. So those are the projects that are under, so the other ones, I'll just mention them as well in case there are some of the companies are interested in agriculture and natural resources. So we have a horticulture value chain development project, which is 74 million, and integrated water resources development project, 222 million, which includes both irrigation and power generation. We also have an integrated water resources development project, 100 million. So an aquifer recharge project, 22 million. So these are the main things that.
So if our customers here, if they're interested in some of these water resource development projects, irrigation projects, these are going to be announced, specific announcements on the ADB webpage as to what particular projects are going to be bid out in the upcoming year?
Yeah, so we have a business opportunities web page, which you can register. You can register and receive notifications of any sector and country that you're interested in. And in addition, you can see from this web page all the projects that are up, the contract that are up for bidding. So all the procurement packages under each project will be up on this website for bidding.
Yes, and then ADB will work with the customer for a project, but the evaluation will be centered in, say, the Ministry of Public Works or the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Livestock, right? So is that the way it works?
So the projects usually they could be prepared by one project sponsor, which is not the ministry. So in that case, the project sponsor really has the most knowledge about how the project is prepared, and the ministry may oversee the overall performance and implementation. But in some cases, the ministry is directly involved in planning and even implementing these projects. So in those cases, the ministry themselves are the implementing agencies of the projects. So they would be directly dealing with the contractors and whichever company is contracted to complete the work. So but for the bidding process, it's all standardized under ADB's procurement policy. So it doesn't, because there's no difference because it's grant. It's still the same standard procurement policy, which is very similar to all the MDB's the policies. Basically, fairness, transparency, and all these principles apply. So after you've have a chance to review what procurement packages are up for bidding, it would be a good time to first get in touch with both the local sponsor, which could be the ministry, or a local project developer. So, and at the same time, the website usually also gives you the ADB project officer, who is basically the project manager, who was responsible for designing this project and eventually for implementing the project as well. So if you have any questions about these procurement packages, it's always good to get in touch with all three if you're interested. And then what follows is the standard process. You submit your bidding documents for evaluation, and if you were chosen to do the project, then you basically go into the implementation stage. And of course, because this funding and financing is coming from ADB, we do ensure that our contractors, the companies who are contracted by ADB are first performing, and secondly, paid for the work that you completed.
Okay, the Ring Road then is the only road project now out for, it's been bid on and it's been accepted. What about the north-south? There was some talk about a north-south link to Bamiyan. Is that under consideration? In other words, we heard a lot about a Salang bypass. We've heard a lot about the north-south to Bamiyan. What about that north-south road? Maybe.
Actually, yeah, I think the Salang maybe. The Salang is not in our pipeline, but it's a standby.
Yeah.
So it's not certain, but there isn't any mention of the north-south.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is right now there is no major road construction project in the pipeline outside of Ring Road?
Outside of Ring Road, no. This Salang corridor part is under consideration. It's not in the pipeline firm, which means that we can't expect it to go up for bidding this year or next year. But it's in the pipeline, which means that they are considering it. And if some project falls through, because we do have an envelope about over 200 million for grants allocated each year. So if for one reason or another, one project falls through, this project may come into the pipeline. And these pipelines are revolving, so
great.
Yeah, it could still change.
Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes. I want to mention that Engineer Wakil Nasri was a last-minute substitute for the COO, was a last-minute substitute for the CEO of DABS, and was unaware that he would be public speaking, which is interesting. That I will check with Amanullah. You didn't give this guy the right instructions. Anyway, I'm going to ask Wakil. It seems like fossil fuels are kind of a non-issue. I was noticing that gas wasn't hardly mentioned in the overview, yet the two major development projects, two out of the three major development projects for energy right now are in fossil fuels. The Bayat project, which we've heard a lot about, and also Ismail Ghazanfar is somewhat further behind Bayat, but coming up strong. And then there's, of course, the hydro project, the Kajaki 2. So, of course, nobody mentions coal. Coal is prevalent throughout Afghanistan. Coal is being mined for 100 years in Afghanistan. It's very small scale in most places. In the Puli Kumri, Baghlan province, it's been fairly substantial. The Czechoslovakia during communist times developed that mine. It is highly, highly undeveloped. The Afghan Investment Corporation not necessarily put a lot of investment in it, but it's providing coal for the cement plant in Puli Kumri. But I would like Wakil to give us an overview of the coal situation, some of the history, the present, and the future. Where do we see this going? Since the Ministry of Mines was here, Nargis Nahan was here and talked to us at a meeting in the Trump Hotel, talking about coal is perhaps number one with gas on the large-scale energy production list.
Thank you. Actually, before it was not plan of Afghanistan government to use coal due to the environmental problems.
Right.
But right now, since we are facing to the huge shortage of power, this is plan of our DAPS in Ministry of Energy and Water to use around 2,000 megawatt coal from different places, Sabzaka, Firat, Ashpushta, and the Risuf. There are three major mine of coals. So now the leadership of energy is working for that to start feasibility study of this project and announce bid for generation of coal power plant at those areas.
Don, could we ask a couple of audience questions?
Definitely questions from the floor.
I want to put one to Dr. Yu first. You talked about offering support for private equity investments in energy that ADB would help either maybe through technical assistance, or what kind of support would you be giving to private equity investors? We have a lot of companies here that have their own equity. Some Afghan, some American, some that are already doing investments very quietly, and others who would be interested in knowing what resources you might be able to help them with if they wanted to do a more sizable equity investment. And I just wanted to ask Mani too after that, if we could, on Bayat's investments in energy sector, what opportunities are there for subcontract support from American companies? Are there niches that you guys would be looking to going forward, either on this project or even on the expansion of the further megawattage that you're going to put into that program? Are there specific opportunities that American energy companies should be listening for with Bayat? But Dr. Yu, please, I'd love to hear your comments.
Regarding private business, I think this is working, huh?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So we have, currently we don't have a private sector project going in Afghanistan. Our private sector group was in Afghanistan last year to check a number of proposals and to check about their viability. So in terms of overall, in terms of general products that we provide, private equity definitely is one of the financial products that we provide. And there are examples that, for example, we provided equity in clean energy and climate change venture capital funds. So this is something that we can do, but whether this is feasible in Afghanistan, it would depend on the case. So in terms of other support for the private sector, we are also actively exploring the possibility of blended financing, so including those support that you just mentioned. So we are capable of providing technical assistance for a private sector project. So if there's a private sector project that requires, for example, a PPP specialist or a legal counsel to help structure the deal, we have trust funds that are set up for these kind of purposes. So these are the ones that are related to the question that you asked. But in addition, we also do, of course, we do direct loan. Direct loan is the most common form of the private sector support. We also have guarantees. So between direct loan and guarantee, these are probably the largest categories of private sector support. We also have trade finance. So these three. Trade finance is more short-term financing, so the other two are more long-term. So these three are the main type of support that we provide, but we do provide other types of support as well.
We'd be very interested, I think, in circulating your new country partnership strategy that might address some of these things so our members can read it and maybe provide feedback to it as well.
Definitely. This country partnership strategy is already up on the web, and I will provide a link, so you're welcome to review this.
Monty.
Yep. So as I mentioned, we're extremely proud for Power One to be working with Siemens. We're actually Siemens, a global company, but the product line that we're using for the fast power is developed out of Siemens here in the United States. It's packaged in Houston, Texas. So as I said, we're creating jobs, and actually some of the technical and operational expertise that will come until we build up the indigenous Afghan capability will be provided out of Texas. So we would absolutely welcome other American companies that are interested in this space. I'd encourage you to contemplate that Bayat Energy also has an upstream and a services business. So we're the preferred bidder on a large natural gas parcel in the northwest part of the country. So we would welcome, whether if there's exploration companies that would be interested in coming in partnership with us on that project. And our oilfield services business. So we signed an MOU with Schlumberger. But as this industry, we have a view that the natural gas industry is going to grow in Afghanistan. I mean, Turkmenistan, just a few kilometers across the border, right, has some of the largest gas fields in the world, and you've seen this enormous sort of growth of services, power, etc. We believe Afghanistan will be on the same trajectory. So services, drills, drilling services, advanced technology, analytics. So we would absolutely welcome the opportunity to have people come talk to us. There's a great story to be told in terms of leveraging the investment that the United States has made on many levels, economic, security, etc., and now converting it into sort of private investors and bringing rewards back commercially to American companies.
Would you, just as a follow-on, would Bayat be open to regional gas and oil exploration companies that might like to partner with you in Afghanistan, and in return having Bayat go into other Asian republics to partner there as well? Is that part of your strategy longer term, or are you going to stay mostly focused on Afghanistan development?
I think in the near term we're going to focus mostly on Afghanistan because that's what we know best, and we think actually there's a great opportunity to make a difference for Afghanistan. That said, there's some really interesting partnerships that have started to unfold just at a geopolitical level between some countries in Central Asia, right? So the Kazakhs have an incredible repository of petroleum expertise, and there's an increasingly growing partnership between the Kazakhs and the Afghans. And of course, the Turkmen, they have probably the most well-developed industry right now. So, but we would welcome that. We've had some, as I tell people, we will always look at anything. We're happy to do so, but really what we want to get done is in Afghanistan in the short term.
Okay, very good. Audience questions. If you want, raise your hand for me, please, and I'll bring you the mic if anyone's interested on specific questions for the panel.
I want to, Jeff,
go ahead, Don, jump in.
While somebody is getting ready to ask a question, I just want to put things in perspective. so that we understand the geostrategic reality of Afghan energy and electricity production. Right now, the consensus of the Afghan government is that they would go from virtually zero coal-fired power, electric power generation to some 2,000 megawatts by the year 2020. Okay, guys, that's 2 years away. Gas, we're looking at quickly more, some 600 megawatts in the near future, and by 2020, 1,200 megawatts. Solar, very difficult, but let's say 500 megawatts. So the bottom line is, the Afghan government has decided that coal in the near term is the #1 source of electric power generation. But we heard from the World Bank that they're going to phase, the people in the deep state, in the bureaucracy of the World Bank, are making it very difficult to do coal, and that they're like the idea of phasing out fossil fuels. By the way, gas produces less CO2, this is climate change arguments. Gas produces less CO2 than coal. But for every BTU you get from gas, you'll get half as, let's compare a BTU from gas and a BTU from coal, a unit of heat. Gas will produce half the amount of CO2 that coal will produce, okay? But half of millions of tons, and this is what happens with CO2 output. Half of a big number is still a giant number. Those of you, ever taken a math course, if you're talking millions, like 10 million, 5 million is still gigantic. So gas is going to be phased out too, I guess. And yet, look at China, and look at India. They've built hundreds of order of magnitude, 1,000 megawatt power plants, some smaller, some larger, over the last decade. And they're firing their economies' growth on coal. And the leading advisor in the Modi government has said that, look, you guys developed your economies on coal. We're going to develop our economy on coal. And we're not going to change that course on the possibility that something might happen in the future related to climate change. I'll just end on that.
Don, I think that's a great point, because the World Bank just put out a study about 60 days ago analyzing the success of India's economic development at the community level in the country, and they said the #1 contributor to it was India's use of clean coal technology at the grassroots level in the nation, and that their economic development would not have achieved the growth levels it's had without that investment. That's the bank putting that out.
Interesting. Any questions from our audience? Arnie? General Fields, Marine Corps General, retired member of the AACC Board of Directors.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you, panel. I would like to pick up on what the Congressman said, sir, regarding coal. Of course, you are the MIT PhD and PE engineer. I'm not. But I thought our objective was to bring Afghanistan into the 21st century as rapidly as we possibly can as a global community impacting their wherewithal on Afghanistan. And I think I heard in the opening video that 40% of the Afghans are still without energy. So how is it that we are allowing apparently a policy of some kind to override that 40% of the Afghans who still, after years of investment and after years of just resources in general being poured into Afghanistan's reconstruction, and still here deep into year 2018, 40% of the Afghans still do not have energy.
60% actually.
Say again?
40% has access and 60% is not.
Okay, but still, there are folks without energy.
60% of the Afghan people do not have access to electricity.
Okay, I had it backwards then. So I'm just asking that we consider a review of the policy to which I think the Congressman referred that is interfering, I think, to some extent with Afghanistan's progress in addressing its energy needs. Thank you.
Well said, Marine Corps General, retired Arnie Fields. Also, Arnie was the original special investigator for Afghanistan reconstruction, the first cigar. He is a cherished member of our board of directors.
We have a question back here, Don.
Hi, Tom Bowen, USAID. I work in Office of Afghanistan and Pakistan Affairs in the energy sector. And first of all, I just want to thank our panelists, and it's good seeing Engineer Wakil again in this venue, Monty Simas. And a question for Engineer Wakil and Dabs, and this is in context of what Monty brought up earlier in his talk, was talking about kind of starting small for advice for private sector companies getting into the energy sector, starting small, scaling up. And so in that context, Engineer Wakil, and does DABS or MEW, I mean, I know that you mentioned these larger projects like Sarobi 2, these large solar projects like at Naglu, Farah, these large coal sector projects, hundreds of megawatts. But in terms of actionable, viable, technical projects that the private sector can get their arms around right now, does MEW or DABS have a list of just even a short list of projects that are feasible, that the government has considered and making those public?
Yes, Mr. Tom. MEW and DABS, both, we are working together, and we have a big list for small scale and large scale projects. For the some area which is off grid, absolutely we need small scale, start from 5 megawatt to 10 megawatts. But for the grid areas which is connected to the grid, we are strongly recommending the large scale project like 100 megawatts and 150 megawatts. That's for solar and also for coal and hydro. If you need any information regarding to the off-grid, I have here with me that the fact sheet of DABS, and it is clearly mentioned that where we have small scale project and where we have large scale projects. Thank you.
Yeah, one additional point, Afghanistan has the capacity for hydro, which is phenomenal. Any of you who've been there and, waded into the icy waters of the rushing rivers after the snow melt will understand. But note, large-scale hydro, other than enhancing existing projects, existing facilities like Sarubi, like Kajaki, like Naglu, is really, it's not feasible. The difficulty of the environmental difficulties, the civilian problems, the sociology, we're not China. We can't do a Three Gorges Dam in Afghanistan. But so if you subtract out the possibilities of large-scale hydro, you're left with fossil fuels. And 8 years of a previous administration's focus on climate change as the great threat to mankind has deprived the people of Afghanistan and poorer countries of access to fossil fuels. It's really quite tragic, and it doesn't need to continue into the future.
Don, we're going to take a break now. I want to thank the panel. Awesome conversation. We're very appreciative. You will live on video and be seen by thousands of people, so thank you so much for your contributions. We're going to take a 10-minute short break, and then we'll come back with our investment panel. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I want to say thank you.